Chapter 21, Militia. 1 year earlier, 608, ab urbe condita, 146 BC. The day after the ambush at the White Cliffs was the worst of Paulus's life. It was not the enemy. The Achaeans had fled away to the south, for the moment thoroughly defeated. It was the fear of decimation. The legion had broken. Almost every soldier had fled. In the chaos of the night, it had been hard to tell the few who had not been guilty of desertion. A legion that had run was summoned on parade. After a coruscating reprimand, lots were drawn, 1 man in 10. The commander took a cudgel and, walking through the ranks, lightly touched each condemned man. Most stood overwhelmed. Some tried to run, but it did them no good. They were hunted through the camp with clubs and stones. Their own tent-mates beat them to death. The legion had been withdrawn to Megara. Now it was preparing to meet its fate. Paulus was scouring the links of his mail with sand. Almost every legionary was attending to his kit, as if it might make some difference. Cross-legged, cleaning his helmet, Tatius called for a drink. Although the camp servants ran no risk of decimation, the tension had got to them. Anirus was clumsy. Some wine spilt onto Tatius's tunic. "You stupid!" Tatius leapt to his feet. His first punch caught the Brutian in the mouth. Anirus staggered back, covering his head. Tatius followed, fists busy. After a stunned moment, Paulus was up. He grabbed his friend. Tatius spun round. The blow to the eye took Paulus off guard. Tatius, eyes wild, had him by the throat. The fingers were digging into his flesh, throttling him. "Stop it!" Alcimus dragged them apart. For a moment, Tatius continued to glare. "We are brothers," Alcimus said. "We will face this together." The madness drained out of Tatius. "Sorry." He looked sheepish. "If it is decimation, I am one of the chosen. That will motivate you." The others did not laugh at the attempted joke. The trumpet sounded. It was time. They began to help each other arm. Paulus stood in the front rank of the Hastati with Alcimus and Tatius. Centurion Naevius stood out in front. The wind raised little dust devils on the parade ground. Paulus's left eye hurt. It was beginning to swell. The consul Mummius joined Orestes on the tribunal. The tension was almost unbearable as the silence stretched. And then Mummius spoke gently to them. He did not mention the 500 shields that had been thrown away in the panic and captured by the Achaeans. The temporary reverse had been the will of the gods. In the dark and confusion, there had been no chance to form a battle line. There had been individual acts of heroism. And then Paulus and 3 other legionaries that he did not know were summoned to the tribunal. Before the assembled legion, they were crowned with the oak wreath of the Corona Civica for saving the life of a fellow citizen. The consul praised them as an example to all. With such soldiers, the legion would acquit itself well in the coming battle. As a token of his trust and to restore its reputation, Mummius announced that it would lead the advance to Corinth. 2 days later they marched down the east of the isthmus. They passed by the White Cliffs. There was little to see apart from the ashes of the pyres. The bodies of Romans and Achaeans alike had been cremated. There was little other debris. The battlefield had been picked clean. Greece was a hard and poor land. To the local peasants, even a broken belt buckle or a shattered sword had a value. The legion led the heavy infantry, but, as military prudence dictated, it was preceded by the light troops. If there were another surprise attack, it would fall on the mercenary archers from Crete and the cavalrymen from the allied kingdom of Pergamum. They were expendable. Their deaths would buy the necessary time for the Roman citizens of the legion to make ready. They took it in easy stages. The first night in camp, the mood of the legion had been euphoric. Far from being decimated, they were not even eating the barley bread of punishment rations. Those legionaries painting their names on their hastily issued replacement shields had responded good-humouredly to the teasing of their comrades. Even Naevius seemed relieved. Men from other maniples had come to pass the time with Paulus, as if some glory of the civic crown might reflect on them. In the morning, not long after they had broken camp, the word came back down the line. The Achaeans were in the neck of the isthmus, drawn up for battle. The legionaries sang as they helped each other arm. They were still singing as they came out onto the plain. "Then awake and beware, for the foeman is near. He is laying an ambush to cut off your rear. Look alive and take thought how to counter the host. Do not sleep at your ease, there's no time to be lost. Make a march, intercept him, get up men and doing, outflank the invader and save us from ruin." The legion turned due west and halted about 500 paces from the shining waters of the Corinthian Gulf. The cavalry and the Cretans had formed a screen to the south, and the dust they raised obscured the view of the enemy. Orders were barked, trumpets sounded, standards inclined. The legion wheeled left and got into battle array. The maneuver went smoothly. The gods knew they had practiced it often enough. Paulus was in the front rank, near the extreme right, the position of greatest honour, the position of greatest danger. The Sabines formed the first three of the file to his left. Alcimus and Tatius were to his right. As ever, Naevius was strutting about in front. The legion was set out in 3 lines, each of 10 maniples, the hastati to the fore. In each line there were gaps between each maniple and its neighbours, each about as wide as its own frontage. The principes covered the gaps in the hastati at the rear, the triarii those in the principes. The checkered formation was reminiscent of the pieces on the board of the game of La Truncoli. The light-armed velites were somewhere out ahead in the dust, with the Cretans and the cavalry. To leave enough room for the cavalry to wheel and turn on the narrow plain of the isthmus, the legion was ordered to form up 16 deep, double the normal depth. None of the maniples were that deep. Those of the hastati and principes should contain 120 men, those of the triarii 60. But the forced march and the white cliffs had taken their toll, and every maniple was well under strength. Although unable to see, Paulus knew the formation was repeated across the army. The legion occupied a quarter of the battle line. To their left was the other legion of Roman citizens. Beyond them, the 2 legions of Italian allies, according to the muster rolls, some 16,000 fighting men. The infantry of the Pergamene allies, having performed so badly at the White Cliffs, had been left behind to guard the camp. A wave of cheering rolled along the army, and out of the haze rode Mummius and his staff. In Greek history books, a general always made a long and rhetorical oration to his whole army. In reality, distance and time intervened. How could all the men hear, and would the enemy remain inactive? But literature did more than reflect reality. It shaped expectations. Mummius would have already addressed a few words to the other 3 legions. Mounted on a suitably heroic grey stallion, Mummius pointed towards the enemy. The gesture was somewhat vitiated by the pall of dust which hid them. "Soldiers, some of you will have heard that a pike phalanx is unstoppable on flat ground like this plain. This is nonsense. A phalanx is only formidable when its line is unbroken. When you throw your javelins, those pila will break their line. Once you are among the enemy, they will be helpless. Their short cutting swords are useless against your sturdy shields. Their flimsy little shields cannot withstand your thrusting swords. You will scatter them like wind sweeping up leaves or lifting thatch from a roof." At the front, Paulus could hear well, but he was not totally reassured. "Our cavalry outnumbers theirs by more than 5 to 1. Once their horsemen have been chased from the field, their infantry will be surrounded. No phalanx has ever stood when hit in the flank and rear." That was more encouraging. "These are the Achaeans that Metellus defeated at Scarphaea and Chaeronea. They are accustomed to defeat, because they are Greeks and we are Romans. Now, in desperation, their numbers are made up not of freemen, but of slaves. A slave should not wait for the hand of its master. A life of servitude, of the bite of the whip, does not prepare a man for the battlefield. They will never stand close to the steel." That was more like it, and the legionaries cheered lustily. "Never forget that our cause is just. The Achaeans declared war on the Spartans. We are bound by sacred oaths to defend our allies. The gods favour our cause." This was slightly less rapturously received. The Spartans meant nothing to the legionaries. Mummius made his steed prance as he struck a martial pose to end his speech. "Only a rabble of slaves and effeminate Greeks stands between you and Corinth, a city overflowing with silver and gold. Sweep them aside, and it is yours. There is not one soldier in the ranks who will not return to Italy a rich man." As Mummius rode away through the maniples, back to his position at the rear of the centre, they cheered him to the skies. "Gold and silver are no use in Hades," Alcimus muttered. "Stick with me and no Greek's going to kill you," Tatius said. "Nothing and no one is going to stop me getting my hands on the plunder of Corinth." Trumpets rang out, and the Pergamene cavalry clattered off to take station on the right wing. Once they had departed, the enemy began to become visible through the slowly dispersing dust. A forest of spears, their tips flashing in the sun, could be seen above the roiling clouds. Here and there below them, pinpoints of shields and armour glinted through the remaining murk. And then, like the breath of a god, a breeze sprang up in the west. It pulled aside the gloom and revealed the enemy. A low sigh came from the legionaries. The phalanx was about 400 paces away. It was arrayed on the far slope of a previously unseen shallow dip in the ground. The phalanx stretched for more than half a mile. Solid and deep, like a huge armoured beast, it ran all the way back to the Saronic Gulf. The shields of those opposite the legion blazed in the sunshine. Paulus felt his heart rise and choke him. No power on earth could break through that mass of armed men. There were thousands upon thousands of them. They would walk forward and spit the Romans on those long pikes like quail. One of the Sabines whimpered with terror. The crotch of his tunic was wet, piss running hot down his legs. A man in the rear ranks retched. Paulus felt his stomach turn at the smell of vomit. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Naevius bellowed. The blow to the head he had taken at the White Cliffs had done no lasting damage, but it had not improved his temper. "What were you expecting, a flock of sheep?" "They aren't slaves," Alcimus said. "Who gives a fuck about their parents?" Naevius roared. "They're Greeks, and they're going to die. You know why they're going to die? Because you've been trained by me." The centurion jerked a thumb at the enemy. "See those spear points wavering like a field of wheat? The men holding them are quaking. They're scared shitless of you, although the gods only know why," he added. It broke the spell. The men laughed. "Now put your shields down. Rest them against your legs. I don't want you delicate girls tiring yourselves out," Naevius said. "Any of you got any wine in your flasks? Pass it around. It'll be an hour or more before the light infantry stops swanning around." Now the dust had cleared. Paulus could see a line of wagons beyond the Achaean phalanx. The tiny figures of women and children were visible. Were the Achaeans so confident of victory that they had brought their families to witness their triumph? Or did their leaders think they would fight better under the eyes of their loved ones? Either way, it blocked their retreat. It was madness. Someone gave Paulus a drink. The wine was unmixed and rough. It burnt as it slipped down his throat, but it warmed his belly. There was no way that he would let Naevius or his comrades down. The prediction of the centurion was accurate. The light troops of both sides swarmed about in the hollow. They went in twos or threes, running forward, jinking and dodging, ducking back, the javelin men to the front, the bowmen hanging back. Missiles whirled through the air. Few found a mark, and no one came to close quarters. "Here we go," Naevius said. From the right came a peal of trumpets and the tramp of horses. As if by mutual consent, the cavalry of the Achaeans and the allies of the Romans began to pace towards each other. At first they went at a walk, squadron after squadron, all in order and richly apparelled. It was obvious at a glance that there were far fewer Achaeans. The trumpets sounded a sharper note. The troopers on both sides kicked on. The ground trembled beneath thousands of hooves as they moved to a canter. The air rang with the shouts and the rattle of their equipment. The thunder of the charge reverberated in Paulus's chest. He found he was holding his breath. An instant before the clash, just before they collided and the foremost riders and their mounts must be dashed to ruin, the Achaeans could be seen hauling on their reins. Their horses skidded about. Some bored into each other. Some men were unseated. A few horses went down. In a dozen heartbeats, the proud formation was transformed into a panicked herd, fleeing back the way they had come. A full-throated roar rose from the watching legionaries. The Achaeans raced past the flank of their phalanx. The Romans' Pergamene allies spurred in pursuit, cutting the rearmost from the saddle. The roar of the legionaries faltered. The Pergamene horsemen did not slacken their pace. The legion fell silent. All the cavalry, allied and enemy, pounded away out of sight to the south. "Fucking Greeks," Tatius said. "No better on our side than the other." "Fucking cavalry," Navius said. "Once they charge, there's never any getting them back. Still, no matter. Now we will have to earn our pay." The Cretan archers hared back through the gaps in the maniples. They were mercenaries, only interested in their wages. They had no intention of being caught between the battle lines. The legion's own velites jogged off to take the open ground vacated by the horsemen. The Achaean light infantry moved in parallel. Doubtless they would continue their inconclusive skirmish. "Hastati! Form line!" Navius ordered. Even as the trumpeters relayed the command, the rear ranks trotted around to fill the spaces between the maniples. In no time, a continuous line of hastati faced the phalanx. But looking over his shoulder, Paulus realized how much thinner and more fragile was the Roman formation. He would have given anything to be with the Principes or Triari, safe behind the front line. Roman trumpets gave the order, "Prepare to advance." "Right, boys!" Navius shouted. "Silence in the ranks! Listen for your orders. No one throw his peeler until I say. Raise the war cry when you're in their faces." The men mumbled they understood. Paulus hoped his training would get him through this, prayed he would not let those around him down. "You ready for war?" Navius's voice carried through the maniple. "Ready!" they bellowed back. 3 times came the call and response. Paulus felt it raise the hackles on his neck. "At the slow military step! Advance!" The ground sloped a little, but it was not hard to keep place. Paulus could hear nothing but the rattle and clatter of armed men moving. He saw a swallow swooping low across the land ahead. Many men were about to suffer and die, but it was nothing to the graceful bird. The Achaean phalanx was moving too. Very slowly, at little more than a shuffle, it edged down the slight incline. Its approach might be ponderous, but it was silent and somehow inexorable. The two forces would clash on the floor of the gentle valley. 300 paces. 200. Dear gods, Paulus thought. How can anyone go through this more than once? He fought down an urge to break ranks, to run forward, get this over one way or another. Beside him, one of the Sabines was swearing continuously under his breath. When they were about 150 paces off, the Achaeans halted. Officers could be seen and heard trying to dress their ranks. Moving in formation would be harder encumbered with an enormous heavy pike like a barge pole, 20 feet or more long. The Romans maintained their slow pace. When they were within 100 paces, the pikes of the Achaeans swung down. The points of the front ranks bristled out like a hedge. Those to the rear sloped over the heads of those at the front. The phalanx resumed its steady advance. The Achaeans were packed close, much tighter than the Romans. There was about 6 feet between the shoulders of the men on either side of Paulus. He would be facing 2 files of the enemy, the points of 10 pikes. He looked at the faces of the leading Achaeans. The cheek pieces of their helmets were fastened. Only their eyes and noses could be seen. They revealed no humanity. 50 paces. First pilum ready! Paulus transferred the lighter of his 2 javelins to his right hand. The heavier remained in his left, which gripped his shield. 30 paces. And throw! 3 quick steps, half-turned, right arm back, and Paulus hurled the pilum. Watching its flight, he got the heavier missile ready. The rain of javelins pelted down into the phalanx. He did not see his land, but here and there an Achaean went down, and a pike dropped to the ground. Second pilum! Throw! 3 more steps, right arm following through, then recovering balance, yanking out his sword. The range was closer, the javelins heavier, and more Achaeans fell. But not enough. Not nearly enough. Holes appeared in the barricade of spears, but they were filled as men jostled to take the places of those hit. Mummius was wrong. The peeler had not broken the jutting barrier of steel that guarded the Achaeans. "Draw swords! Charge!" It was like running into a wall. Spearheads rammed into the leather and wood of Paulus's shield. They jarred him to a halt. Shield held low, the bottom rim almost on the earth, he hunkered down. The tip of a pike sliced by his shoulder. He slashed at it with his sword. The blade hacked a chunk out of the wood, but did not shear through the shaft. Another got under his shield, narrowly missed his boot. A terrible scream like a pig at the slaughterhouse. The leading Sabine was clutching at the pike that had run him through the stomach. The legionary following stumbled into his back. Another pike took him clean in the throat. Paulus stared in horror. The inattention almost was fatal. A pike thrust, harder than seemed human, punched clean through his shield. The razor-sharp tip missed his face by a hand's breadth. And then he was fighting like a madman, all fear forgotten, swept away by the desire to survive. He chopped off the shaft poking through his shield. Bending low, he tried to force the pikes up and out of his way. To turn and run would open his defenceless back to the enemy. It would invite death. The only way out was through those ahead. 3 paces back! The words meant nothing to Paulus. Using his shield as a battering ram, he forced his way into the furious heart of the pikes. Twisting and turning, lopping off spear points, he wormed his way deeper. A strong hand caught the back of his mail coat, hauled him out. "You fucking deaf boy!" Navius dragged him back. "I give an order, you obey!" 6 or 7 paces separated the wall of pikes and the panting line of legionaries. Both sides were stationary. Achaean officers were yelling, getting their men in order, working them up to cross over that space, to go back into the storm of fighting. The respite would not last long. Paulus straightened up and slipped. There was mud underfoot. It had not rained. The mud was red. The ground was greasy with blood. Paulus was exhausted, his limbs shaking. He knew he could not face that again. Glancing at Tatius on his right, he saw the battle madness draining from the face of his friend. Alcimus looked no better. They were still alive, but they were spent. This time they would all run. "We're done, boys," Navius called. "Get ready to fall back. Our battle's over."